It began with a whisper, a cryptic murmur that something was brewing behind palace walls. Days before the confrontation, royal aides noticed Catherine's demeanor shift quieter, colder, calculating. But no one could predict that beneath the elegance and poise, a silent fury was simmering. What secret had Catherine uncovered? What pushed the future queen to confront Camilla face to face? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It wasn't just a change, it was a transformation. The once serene and composed Princess of Wales began to carry an unfamiliar weight in her eyes, a haunted sharpness that made those closest to her feel unsettled. One aide who had served her for years described it as a coldness that wasn't there before a stillness that felt like the calm before a very real storm. Whispers of a private meeting in the early morning hours began to circulate among the staff. Catherine was seen exiting one of the lesser-used royal chambers, her face unusually pale, her lips tight, clutching her phone like it held a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. Her public appearances told a different story than the one polished in press photos. The warm, effortless smiles were replaced with tight, unreadable expressions. Her walk, usually graceful and fluid, had turned brisk, sharp, almost militaristic. Royal watchers noted the shift, and while tabloids chalked it up to exhaustion, insiders knew better. Something had changed. Catherine wasn't just troubled, she was preparing. Inside the palace, the mood was suffocating. Staff reportedly began walking on eggshells, afraid of saying the wrong thing, of accidentally triggering a reaction. Rumors swirled that a message meant for someone else had landed in Catherine's hands. A note, brief, cryptic, and dripping with calculated menace, had allegedly been intercepted. Though no one could confirm its content, the word replacement was said to appear in it, and some speculated it was sent by Camilla to an undisclosed recipient. If true, it wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. What made this more dangerous was the timing. Behind the scenes, relations between William and his father had grown increasingly strained. The warmth that once existed between the heir and the monarch had cooled into formality, cold meetings, empty conversations, a vacuum of trust. It was as if the very bond that anchored the royal line was beginning to fray, and Catherine could feel the pull of it. Her instincts sharpened, her composure tightened, and then came the call. Late at night, long after the palace lights had dimmed, Catherine was overheard speaking in a low, urgent tone with someone whose identity remained a mystery. Only one phrase was clearly audible to the aide who passed by her door: "She knows. And she thinks I won't do anything." That was the moment everything shifted. The moment the suspicion became certainty. The moment Catherine decided she would no longer stay silent. But the warning signs were only the beginning. The real firestorm would ignite behind a door no one dared enter, until it was too late. The palace is filled with rooms no one speaks of. One in particular, an ornate sitting room tucked away from the public eye, was the site of a royal earthquake. There, Catherine cornered Camilla in a moment that would echo through royal history. What happened inside that room was witnessed by one trembling aide, and now their account is leaking. It was supposed to be a routine midday rotation. At least that's how it was scheduled. But palace insiders now believe the overlap in Timon G was no accident. Camilla, having just finished a short press briefing in the West Wing, was due for a brief retreat in the Queen's private parlour, a space few are permitted to use. What she didn't know was that Catherine had already slipped inside minutes before, completely unnoticed. When Camilla entered, the room was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Then, the door clicked shut behind her. According to one staffer stationed just outside, it started with civil tones, measured, polite. But within minutes, voices escalated. First Catherine's firm, unyielding. Then Camilla's sharp and incredulous. The aide leaned in, only to be caught by another senior staff member who gave a single command: "You heard nothing." But the truth has a way of slipping through cracks in even the most impenetrable walls. And what seeped out from behind that door was enough to shake even the most hardened royal insider. Sources close to the inner circle now claim that Catherine stood square. Lee in front of the only exit, her posture stiff, eyes blazing with the weight of everything unspoken. Camilla reportedly made a dismissive gesture, something Catherine didn't take lightly. What followed was a confrontation decades in the making. "You've crossed the line for the last time," Catherine allegedly hissed, her voice laced with the venom of betrayal. It wasn't just a spat, it was a reckoning. The words carried years of swallowed slights, power plays, and silent sacrifices. Camilla, for all her seasoned composure, was reportedly stunned into momentary silence. And then, in a voice icy with outrage, she snapped back with 3 words that still ring through palace gossip circles, like a thunderclap: "How dare you?" That phrase, both defensive and damning, confirmed what many had only dared to suspect. This was no misunderstanding. This was a war behind silk curtains. And yet, no security was called, no aides intervened. For nearly 20 minutes, the future queen and the current consort stood locked in a standoff that would alter the family's internal dynamics forever. By the time Camilla exited, her face was drained, her breath short, and her gaze vacant. Catherine remained inside for nearly 10 more minutes alone, unshaken, unreadable. What triggered this royal explosion? To find the answer, we must look into the secrets buried deep beneath the crown. For months, Camilla had been quietly pulling strings, managing perceptions, influencing Charles, even whispering words into the ears of those closest to the throne. But Catherine, ever the strategist, had seen it all. And what she discovered threatened to expose Camilla's carefully spun web of royal manipulation. It didn't happen overnight. Camilla's rise to influence was calculated, subtle, wrapped in layers of charm and tradition. While the public smiled at carefully curated photo ops and orchestrated appearances, something darker was evolving behind closed doors. Charles, once fiercely guarded in his decis, Ions, had become increasingly reliant on Camilla's counsel. She was no longer just a companion, she was a gatekeeper. And more often than not, the gate she guarded kept William and Catherine on the outside. Quiet, unrecorded meetings between Charles and Camilla became more frequent, slipping past protocol without a trace. When questions were raised, they were dismissed as routine. But to Catherine, they were anything but routine, they were strategic. The shift was undeniable. Events that once featured Catherine prominently began to phase her out in subtle, deliberate ways. A changed seating arrangement here, a last-minute schedule shuffle there. Speeches rewritten, engagements reassigned. It was as if someone was methodically pulling threads from Catherine's public image, unraveling her presence one stitch at a time. Whispers among palace aides hinted at a campaign, one carefully orchestrated to sideline the future queen without drawing attention. Allegations surfaced suggesting Camilla had a hand in leaking unflattering anecdotes to select journalists, planting seeds of doubt about Catherine's emotional readiness for the crown. One comment in particular, a cutting quote about Catherine not understanding the weight of legacy, appeared in multiple tabloids within days. The source was never identified, but the fingerprints were unmistakable. And then came the proposed protocol, change, a seemingly minor update in ceremonial structure, but one that would reposition Camilla's visibility ahead of Catherine's in key events. For Catherine, this was the tipping point. A deviation from established hierarchy that could only mean one thing. Camilla wasn't content with her role. She wanted to redefine it on her own terms. That's when Catherine connected the dots. These weren't isolated moves. They were part of a larger game, one that Camilla had been playing quietly for years. And Catherine, watching from the margins, realized with chilling clarity that the queen consort wasn't due. Stint rearranging roles, she was rewriting the monarchy's future. Catherine's resolve hardened. This wasn't about rivalry anymore. It wasn't about image or position. It was about preservation. Because what Camilla was building behind the scenes wasn't just a shift in power, it was a slow, silent dethroning. And Catherine knew that if she didn't act, everything her family stood to inherit, everything Diana had fought to protect, would be reshaped in Camilla's image. But Catherine wasn't just fighting for her place, she was fighting for her children's future. And the monarchy itself. Behind every royal woman stands a royal man with divided loyalties. For Prince William, the lines between duty, love, and legacy were blurring fast. As tensions between his wife and stepmother escalated, he was forced to make a choice, one that would pit blood against bond. He had always been the steady one, the golden heir, the image of royal restraint and resolve. But now, William was unraveling. Not publicly, never. Publicly, but in the quiet corners of the palace, where the cameras couldn't reach and where emotions ran raw, he was no longer the composed prince the world believed him to be. Caught in a crossfire between the woman he chose and the woman fate had forced into his life, he was drowning in the undertow of a conflict he didn't create but could no longer avoid. Staff members close to the couple say he tried to maintain neutrality at first, offering Catherine hollow reassurances, trying to play peacemaker while suppressing the fury building beneath the surface. But the illusion shattered the moment Charles refused to acknowledge what was happening. Their private argument, never officially confirmed but impossible to ignore, was the spark that lit the fuse. Raised voices heard behind locked doors, the sound of something heavy slammed to the floor, and then a tense silence that echoed for days. According to insiders, William demanded that Charles confront Camilla's manipulations. Charles refused, dismissing the allegations as emotional exaggeration. That response broke something in William. The next day, he skipped an event both he and his father were scheduled to attend. Catherine stood in his place. In his attempts to protect the monarchy, William had failed to protect his wife. He saw it clearly now. The pressure, the whispers, the slow erasure of her place in the spotlight, it had all been dismissed, minimized, and ignored. When he finally asked Catherine to let it go, to move past the feud for the sake of peace, she looked at him with a quiet sadness that cut deeper than anger. Letting it go, she said, is how she wins. And William knew, deep down, that she was right. Memories of childhood came rushing back. The strained silences at the dinner table, the carefully staged smiles, the way Camilla inserted herself into every part of his father's life, until there was no room left for anyone else. He remembered the headlines, the whispers, the way Diana cried behind CL. Said doors. And now, decades later, the same shadows were beginning to creep over Catherine. History wasn't just repeating, it was mutating, taking new shape in the cold form of palace strategy. There were whispers that Camilla had mocked Catherine in private, calling her the perfect princess, laced with sarcasm and jealousy. The insult wasn't about Catherine's image, it was about her power, her growing influence, her popularity. The very things that once made her an asset were now a threat. And as William stood silently by, the public began to notice. His absence of support, his refusal to speak out, became its own betrayal, one that Catherine could no longer ignore. But Catherine had reached a breaking point, and when silence became betrayal, she chose to act. Buried in a locked drawer, hidden from palace eyes, was a journal Catherine never meant to be found. But once it surfaced, everything changed. In it, raw emotion, private suspicions, and cryptic entries that painted a terrifying picture of the war behind the crown. The leak came from deep within. A royal insider whose identity remains unknown released carefully chosen pages from the journal, pages that didn't just raise questions, they detonated them. These weren't casual musings or idle reflections. They were confessions, unravelings, and warnings wrapped in layers of secrecy. Catherine had turned to the page when the palace refused to listen, and when her voice was ignored in public. She poured her soul into paper, never thinking those words would escape the drawer she kept under lock and key. But now, the walls were closing in, and every sentence she'd tried to hide was now haunting the monarchy. One entry revealed a startling moment of clarity. Catherine described feeling like a guest in her own palace. A woman watched, measured, and maneuvered. She wrote of Camilla, not as a stepmother-in-law, but as an operator. "She watches me with eyes that smile but don't blink," the line read. "Every kindness feels lick. A trap with silk around it." The journal repeatedly questioned Camilla's growing reach in royal decisions, hinting at moments where Catherine was cut out entirely. The bitterness wasn't loud, it was surgical. Catherine didn't vent, she documented. Even more chilling were the entries that painted a picture of emotional isolation. Moments where Catherine confessed to dreams of walking away from it all, of disappearing. "I wonder if peace only exists outside these walls," she wrote. Would it be weakness to choose it? But what jolted even the most hardened royal courtiers was the appearance of a codename. Camilla was never mentioned directly in the darkest passages. Instead, she was called the Falcon, a title that appeared again and again beside phrases like watching, waiting, and circling. One particularly disturbing entry spoke of a betrayal closer than she thought, raising the terrifying possibility that someone Catherine trusted had been feeding information to Camilla all along. The leak did more than scandalize, it destabilized. Suddenly, Catherine wasn't just the dutiful wife and future queen. She was a woman cracking under pressure, mapping her fears in ink, and warning of a power struggle no one wanted to acknowledge. "I fear she won't stop until everything Diana built is gone," one entry read. And then, in the final pages, the most damning line of all, "If she won't step down, I'll step forward." That single sentence sent shockwaves through the monarchy, igniting debate over what Catherine had truly meant. Was it symbolic, or was it a declaration? Speculation erupted. Had Catherine planned a direct challenge? Had she confided in anyone about what that final entry truly meant? The palace refused to comment. The press was gagged. But behind the scenes, silence wasn't enough to contain the rupture. Because this was no longer just about a conflict between two women, it had become a question of who the monarchy would serve in the years to come. The diary shocked the palace, but it was what Catherine said next in person that shattered the silence once and for all. "You've stolen more than a crown, you've stolen peace." These weren't words whispered. They were hurled like daggers in that fateful confrontation. Eyewitnesses report Catherine unleashed years of pain, rage, and revelation in a few stunning sentences that Camilla was utterly unprepared for. It was the culmination of months, no years of silent observation and painful restraint. Catherine, known to the world for her grace and composure, finally let the mask fall. And what emerged was not a woman broken, but one sharpened by betrayal. As palace aides lingered outside the doors of that same forbidden room, the tension was suffocating. And then, her voice broke through low, unwavering, and unmistakably furious. "You've stolen more than a crown, you've stolen peace." It wasn't theatrical, it was personal, it was real. For too long, Catherine had watched Camilla bend Charles to her will, twisting his affection, manipulating his memory, driving a wedge between a father and his firstborn. And no, she said it out loud. "You poisoned his heart against his own son," she accused, her voice laced with raw fury. That line, witnesses say, stopped Camilla cold. No deflection, no clever retort, just silence. And then Catherine, in a voice that reportedly trembled from something deeper than anger, something ancestral, generational, brought Diana into the room. "She still cries in this palace," she said, "and you hear her." The line wasn't meant to wound, it was meant to haunt. And it did. Because in that moment, the ghost of Diana didn't just loom. She screamed through Catherine. Those who stood outside say Camilla was reduced to something they had never seen: silence. Her usual armor of polished words, dry wit, and stony expressions cracked, and through it seeped fear. Real fear. Catherine wasn't threatening her physically, she was threatening her legacy. "If the people knew what I know," Catherine warned. And with that unfinished sentence, the ground shifted. Not because she revealed anything specific, but because she didn't need to. The suggestion alone was an earthquake, the implication more dangerous than any confession. Camilla, once a master at turning conflict to her favor, couldn't find footing. For the first time in years, aides say she looked small, not belittled, not embarrassed, cornered. By truth, by memory, by a woman she had underestimated for far too long. The Queen Consort left that room trembling, not from volume but from precision, not from threat but from reckoning. Catherine hadn't raised her voice. She had raised the truth, and there was no silencing it now. But royal wounds don't heal with words. And this confrontation set in motion a crisis the palace could no longer hide. The monarchy thrives on silence, but now the silence was broken. Within hours of the confrontation, a flurry of PR maneuvers, last-minute interviews, and mysterious cancellati swept across the royal calendar. The firm was in panic mode, desperate to erase what had already begun to leak. Damage control began before dawn. Before the confrontation had even finished echoing through the halls, palace aides were already drafting statements, altering schedules, and reaching out to media contacts with carefully rehearsed lines. The official communication, released to the press, was brief, and bland a vague reassurance of family unity and unwavering dedication to public service. It said nothing, but the fact that it existed at all told the public everything. Something had happened, something seismic, and no matter how desperately the palace tried to coat it in polish, the cracks were already visible. Catherine vanished, not literally but from view. For days she was nowhere to be seen. A string of public engagements was quietly cancelled. Paparazzi stationed at usual checkpoints reported total blackout. And when questioned, the palace offered no explanation. No illness, no scheduling conflict, just silence. In her absence, Camilla was sent out alone to an event she hadn't been scheduled to attend, standing before cameras that caught more than they were supposed to. Observers immediately noted her expression, tight, worn, rattled. The queen consort looked like a woman desperately clinging to poise and losing grip fast. Behind the scenes, the palace grew more paranoid. Rumors began to spread that staff members present on the day of the confrontation were handed non-disclosure agreements, some so strict they forbade speaking to their own families about what they'd witnessed. Aides who had worked comfortably for years now kept their phones off inside palace walls. Eyes shifted nervously during meetings. Every hallway felt like it was bugged. Trust, once fragile, was now non-existent. And yet, control was slipping. The British press, usually complicit in maintaining the royal mystique, had started asking questions. But according to multiple insiders, senior editors were contacted directly by palace liaisons, with strong suggestions to hold off on speculative coverage. Certain photos disappeared from newswires. Footage expected to air was suddenly pulled, and still, the questions multiplied. Where was Catherine? Why had Camilla emerged from a closed-door meeting looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight? Why did Charles cancel a planned trip with no explanation? Online forums and social media did what official channels refused to connect the dots. Threads exploded with speculation, timelines were dissected, and eagle-eyed viewers noticed inconsistencies in recently released clips. One palace video, intended to project calm, was re-uploaded after mysteriously losing a full 30 seconds of footage. It didn't take long before #WhereIsCatherine began trending. The monarchy was no longer in control of the narrative. The public didn't just suspect a cover-up, they were convinced of it. Bar BT, one camera, one angle, one leak was all it took to ignite the firestorm they feared most. It was only 37 seconds long. But in that clip, the world saw the unthinkable Catherine confronting Camilla with a rage and clarity no royal has ever dared to show. The video went viral within minutes, and suddenly, the royal family couldn't bury the truth anymore. The footage surfaced on a forgotten corner of the internet, an obscure forum frequented by anonymous palace watchers and royal truth-seekers. No watermark, no source. Just a low-resolution clip titled only with the date and time. At first, it looked like another speculative hoax. But then the footage played, and jaws dropped. There was no mistaking who was in that room. Catherine stood tall, her voice sharp, her expression unreadable but unmistakably intense. Camilla flinched, not theatrically, not exaggeratedly, but with the instinctive recoil of someone who had just been struck by something far more dangerous than physical force, truth. The confrontation the palace had scrambled. To hide was no longer rumor, it was documented reality. The audio was fuzzy, distorted by static and distance. But one phrase rang through with eerie clarity. "You destroyed what she built." The internet exploded. Within 10 minutes, the clip was reposted on Reddit, Twitter, Telegram. Within an hour, it reached YouTube, TikTok, and international news sites. Experts began dissecting it frame by frame. Lip readers analyzed every word Catherine's mouth formed. Body language analysts swarmed the clip with commentary. Headlines screamed about the breakdown of royal decorum, and speculation spun wildly out of control. Was this a power move? A breakdown? A declaration of war? Rs. Suddenly, the public wasn't just interested, they were invested. Factions formed overnight. Team Catherine supporters praised her for standing up, finally breaking the cycle of silence and submission that had haunted the monarchy for decades. They called her brave, raw, human. Team Camilla loyalists called it a betrayal, a disruption of order, a dangerous crack in the royal institution. But even those defending Camilla couldn't ignore the truth in her eyes during those fleeting seconds. She looked cornered. Exposed. The footage had turned a private fire into a public inferno. The royal family scrambled. Within hours, official channels issued a vague denial of the video's authenticity, but they refused to mention names. The silence, once strategic, now reeked of desperation. Charles, scheduled to speak at a charity event the next day, appeared visibly shaken. He stumbled over his opening words, his hands trembled. Cameras caught what aides tried to shield a monarch no longer in control. The firm was unraveling in real time, and no carefully worded press release could stop it, but while the public watched, one figure remained silent. Until now, she wasn't supposed to speak, she wasn't supposed to challenge. But Catherine had had enough. In a moment that defied centuries of royal obedience, she made a public statement, one so bold, so unfiltered, it left the monarchy in stunned silence. It began not with a press release, not through a palace-approved broadcast, but with a simple video uploaded directly to a social platform. No palace branding, no royal filter, just Catherine alone, poised and unscripted. It was the most unorthodox move the firm had seen in decades. And it wasn't approved. She didn't ask, she didn't wait. She broke protocol deliberately, almost defiantly, and with millions watching, she delivered the words no royal had ever dared to speak with such raw clarity: "We are not above pain, and I will not be silent in mine." The message wasn't calculated, it was cathartic. It was a refusal to be erased, a rejection of the narrative being spun behind palace walls. The fallout was instant. The video exploded across every major platform. News anchors abandoned scheduled segments to cover the statement live. Public support surged with breathtaking speed. Hashtags flooded social media. People around the world echoed her message, embracing her vulnerability, her power, her refusal to retreat into silence. She became a symbol not of rebellion but of reclamation. For the first time in modern monarchy, a woman stood not just in the shadow of the crown, but in command of her own story. No veil of diplomacy, no royal handler hovering just off-screen. Catherine had stepped forward, unarmored and unapologetic. Inside the palace, fury ignited. Charles' insider's claim was incandescent, not because she spoke, but because she did it without him, without consent, without control. His fury wasn't rooted in disrespect, it was rooted in fear. Fear that the monarchy's carefully maintained mask had finally cracked beyond repair. Camilla, meanwhile, vanished from the public eye. A planned appearance was abruptly cancelled. Her team cited scheduling conflicts, but the silence spoke volumes. She had retreated. Whether from shame, strategy, or shock, no one could say. And now the future stood on unsteady ground. The old order was unraveling. The hierarchy that once determined who could speak and when had been shattered. Catherine hadn't just broken a rule, she had rewritten the rulebook. She was no longer a figurehead. She was a voice. And that voice had shaken the institution to its very core. The question no longer was whether Catherine belonged at the center of the monarchy. The question was, how long could the monarchy survive without her? This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. And the battle for the crown had only just begun. Thanks for watching. Please, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.